Tracking whales is important for the survival of many of their species, but until very recently, it was a bit of an arduous and dubiously accurate task.
For years, the Mariana Trench has been the quiet enigma of our planet, a place too deep, too dark, and too distant to disturb. But in 2014, that silence broke. A sound unlike anything ever recorded echoed from 7 miles beneath the surface. At first, scientists called it curious, then unsettling. Now, after more than a decade of data, the mystery has been solved, and the answer isn't comforting. Whales are behaving like sentinels. Machines are crashing from the sound, a signal buried in layers of silence. What if the ocean wasn't just hiding something ancient, but guarding it? This isn't a tale of folklore or fiction. This is about something very real and very awake. The question isn't just what lies at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it's what used to lie there and why it isn't there anymore. Ready to go deeper? The biotwang. In the summer of 2014, a team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, launched an acoustic survey of the Mariana Trench using autonomous underwater gliders. What they captured was a sound that would leave marine scientists around the world puzzled and uneasy. The sound, later nicknamed the biotwang, was described by NOAA scientist Sharon Newkirk as having some characteristics similar to sounds produced by baleen whales. But ultimately defied classification. It began with a deep animalistic growl, followed by a high-frequency metallic chime, like struck steel reverberating through the water. This haunting sequence repeated with such precision and rhythm that it suggested something deliberate, yet it matched no known animal, geological process, or human-made device. The biotwang stood out because it did not align with any established acoustic signature. Whale calls, including those of baleen species, typically have identifiable patterns associated with mating or navigation, and they generally conform to biological frequency ranges. It's very complex in frequency composition, Newkirk explained in the original NOAA report, emphasizing that it didn't resemble known sounds from fish or geological activity. Tectonic shifts and hydrothermal activity also produce predictable seismic sounds with specific decay rates. In contrast, the biotwang was both structured and unpredictable, rising, falling, then vanishing, only to return hours later in slightly altered forms. Even crazier was the apparent motion of the sound. For the next 48 hours after its first detection, the biotwang was never in one fixed area. It seemed to rebound through large stretches of the trench, going deeper with each recording, sometimes shooting miles horizontally. This prompted the investigators to hypothesize whether the sound was bouncing off some hidden structural feature or somehow traversing an unseen pathway through the complex geological contour of the trench. The NOAA recordings made this sense of mobility feel less random. The acoustic modeling indicated that the biotwangs had directional patterns and spatial accuracy similar to echolocation, just on a scale never seen before. Neither machine learning nor a comparison with other global underwater sound databases comprising over 200,000 hours of audio found anything like it in their own database. It wasn't a new whale species, nor an isolated geological event. It is unlike anything we've heard in that region before, Newkirk confirmed. The mixture of biological cadence with possibly non-biological sounds led to even bigger questions. Could it be that unknown environmental factors had modulated a biological signal, or was it something else? As the sound continued to resist an explanation, what was initially considered a biological oddity rapidly transitioned into a signal of potential importance. The ocean, thought for many years to be Earth's last frontier, seemed to have whispered through the trench something structured, intentional, and unwanted. But the sound wasn't the only thing acting strangely. Something else had started circling the trench. Whale behavior gone rogue. Following the mysterious emergence of the biotwang in 2014, researchers began observing equally baffling behavior from a specific group of baleen whales, bride's whales. Typically found in warm, shallow coastal waters, these whales were suddenly appearing near the Mariana Trench. one of the most extreme and inhospitable environments on Earth. Their repeated and deliberate return to the trench over the years defied established patterns of whale migration and habitat preference. These whales shouldn't even be there, one NOAA researcher noted, referring to the abyssal zone's crushing pressure, frigid temperatures, and total darkness. Yet, year after year, a single pod returned, as though drawn by something only they could perceive. The most peculiar aspect was how the whales behaved once near the trench. Using archived sonar data and acoustic monitoring, scientists noted that the pod formed tight circular patterns, orbiting a central point deep within the trench, but never breaching it. Despite having the biological capability to dive deep for short periods, the whales maintained a cautious perimeter, vocalizing frequently but refusing to approach the core of their formation. These weren't random movements. Their echolocation calls were not only spatially coordinated, but seemed to serve a navigational function, possibly mapping or surveying the area with acoustic precision. This behavior led to the proposal of the so-called Marco Polo hypothesis by the researchers. It suggests that communication may not have been the only function behind the calls. Rather, whales could have been using their calls to triangulate and map the trench environment in real time. These sounds, alternating with the near-complete absence of light and very few sensory cues, served as coordinated sonartermic pings that whales used to stay in formation while circumventing an enigmatic yet cautiously avoided zone. What disturbed the researchers even more was a change in the vocalizations over time, seemingly along the tone and structure of the biotwang, as if the whales were somehow responding to or trying to engage with it. As more data poured in, one frightening pattern emerged. They were not just navigating, it was as if they were protecting something. Their avoidance of the trench's central point, in conjunction with their tight, repetitive pacing and synchronized calls, suggested a possible kind of protective or warning behavior. They circle it like sentinels, but never cross into it, was what a marine biologist associated with the long-term acoustic tracking had to say. Whether this behavior was instinctive, learned, or evoked by some unknown stimulus within the trench remains to be answered. However, their rogue behavior clearly signaled that something down at the bottom of the Mariana Trench had not just attracted the whales, it had altered them. Echoes of intelligence. What began as a strange sound in 2014 quickly evolved into something far more complex and potentially intelligent. As NOAA researchers continued to monitor the biotwang, they discovered the sound was not fixed in location. Over several days, it shifted vertically, descending deeper into the trench with each new recording. More intriguingly, the sound also exhibited lateral movement, traveling across vast stretches of the Mariana Trench in an almost patterned fashion. This wasn't a random drift through underwater currents. Instead, it moved with an uncanny precision, at times zigzagging or tracing the trench's contours, as if actively scanning or surveying the geography. Advanced acoustic modeling revealed even more startling behavior. The biotwang's point of origin didn't merely shift, it moved in ways that resembled deliberate pacing, forming acoustic footprints that clung to the jagged walls of the trench. The pattern suggested it was not simply a creature vocalizing or a geologic anomaly reverberating through rock. It behaved like a probe, scanning its surroundings with purpose. It traveled with a consistency that indicated awareness. One NOAA analyst commented during an internal briefing. These observations raised difficult questions. Was the sound a form of communication, an exploratory mechanism, or something even more advanced? With 200,000 hours of oceanic recordings in sight, researchers were already making use of AI to parse the vast spectrograms. What emerged was a dreadful revelation. The biotwang trajectory, though repeatable along certain spatial paths, modulated its signal depending on temperature and seafloor topography, thus an adaptive quality, a signal that could interpret and respond to its environment. Since then, theories began to suggest that the sound source was not just a natural phenomenon, but rather something akin to cognition. It's not behaving like a sound, it's behaving like a search, remarked Dr. Akari Watanabe, lead seismologist on the Trench Echo Initiative. This seeming cognizance ruptured classical models of marine behavior. While many researchers had described echolocation as a reactive means for whales to find food, biotwangs were noted for their proactive and almost incessant regularity, like something on a mission. The notion that something might be actively mapping the Mariana Trench from the inside, a creature capable of interpreting and responding to sophisticated acoustic environments, turned a scientific anomaly into a deeply disquieting mystery. If something was investigating the trench, what larger question did that beg? What was it looking for? And what happens when it finds it? The AI spectrogram breakthrough. By 2022, researchers studying the biotwang had amassed more than 200,000 hours of audio recordings from various locations around the Mariana Trench, far more data than human analysts could feasibly review. To process this immense archive, the Oceanic Frontier Institute turned to advanced AI and machine learning algorithms, which transformed raw audio into spectrograms, visual representations of sound frequencies over time. This shift allowed scientists to detect patterns invisible to the human ear, providing new clarity into the mysterious acoustic environment of the trench. According to NOAA scientist Sharon Newkirk, the spectrograms revealed correlations we hadn't been able to identify before. The AI was seeing something deeper, literally and figuratively. The key breakthrough came when the AI began detecting hidden seismic pulses embedded beneath the biotwang's higher-pitched components. Initially, researchers believed the sound might originate solely from marine mammals such as Bride's whales, whose calls the AI matched with high accuracy. However, layered beneath these vocalizations were subtle rhythmic vibrations not typical of whale communication. These pulses were not consistent with natural tectonic movements or known marine biology. Instead, they exhibited a rhythmic, non-random pattern, a secondary acoustic layer that hinted at something more complex and possibly orchestrated. Even more disturbing was the discovery that those seismic pulses were only found in a very limited region of the trench and only during biotwang events. The timing and geographic alignment were entirely too precise to be coincidental. Researchers began to suspect that the trench may have been participating in this soundscape. Something or someone in it or beneath it was responding to, or perhaps active upon, the whale's vocal behavior. The conjectured possibility that some geophysical or anthropogenic mechanism was affecting marine life by resonance was no longer in the realm of mere speculation. It was a working hypothesis. One researcher described it as a duet between biology and something else. This strange possibility reframed the whole inquiry. From being mere background noise, or even misinterpreted whale songs, the biotwang began to be considered as a layered signal combining organic and inorganic sources. Echoes of that signal might correspond rather to the whales, for example, echoing out into amplifications, declinations, or distortions. The unearthing of such hidden layers pointed toward a possibility of control over acoustic phenomena never observed in marine science. As evidence continued to gather and resonance patterns became extrapolated, one terrifying question loomed large in everyone. If the whales were being manipulated by these pulses, what else could be? The Marco Polo hypothesis. As scientists continued to observe the unusual presence of Bride's whales near the Mariana Trench, a new theory emerged, one that suggested these animals were doing far more than simply migrating or communicating. Dubbed the Marco Polo hypothesis, this idea posits that the whales were using their echolocation calls not just for interaction, but to acoustically map their surroundings in the abyssal dark. The whales were observed emitting synchronized calls, forming tight pods, and repeatedly circling a central point in the trench, never diving into it, but always surrounding it from a distance. Their precision and regularity were striking. It looked like sonar behavior, but carried out on a coordinated biological scale, one marine analyst explained. The name Marco Polo references the children's game, where one calls out and listens for a response to orient themselves, a fitting metaphor for what the whales appeared to be doing. Researchers found that these whales, known to prefer shallow and temperate waters, were navigating a region of crushing pressure and near freezing temperatures, far outside their expected behavior. archived sonar data and tracking patterns showed that this particular pod returned annually to the same area, but never crossed into a specific zone at the trench's core. Their avoidance of that spot, despite advanced navigational behavior, raised alarms. They always kept their distance, noted one NOAA biologist. It was like they were circling a fire they didn't want to get too close to. The attractiveness of the hypothesis was strengthened by the consistency with which the whales formed, and by the increasing complexity of their calls. AI analyses showed patterns with a structure comparable to that of the bio-twang, indicating that the whales were either responding to or trying to copy the alien tone. Some hypothesized that this would be an example of acoustic triangulation, using the call and response mechanism to create an underwater sonar-like map for their environment. Then, if so, the ramifications were indeed great. Those whales were not just adapting, but were actually trying to explore or keep track of something that eluded humans' ken at the bottom of the trench. Their behavior almost seemed purposeful, as if they had some duty connected with that forbidden area. That was the most terrifying possibility, that they had been watching or warning against whatever lay at the heart of the trench. Their vocal patterns and body positioning around the area resembled territorial or sentinel behavior, which was further emphasized by the fact that they had not breached the boundary zone. However, one could argue their case by how often they returned. Some marine biologists speculated that this behavior had been inherited by the pod over generations, a learned response to something old and dangerous. The reason remains known to none, but evidence increasingly points toward a pod not simply acting instinctively. Indeed, it seemed eminent in its environmental awareness than was ever expected. The whales were not just bystanders, they were perhaps the first responders to a secret that had slept beneath the sea for centuries. Their strange behavior may have been the first alarm, but 2016 proved something much bigger had already begun to stir. The 2016 signal spike. In 2016, amid one of the most intense El Niño events in recorded history, global attention focused on climate anomalies. Ocean surface temperatures rose more than 2 degrees Celsius in the central and eastern Pacific, coral reefs bleached, and extreme weather patterns spread across continents. But hidden beneath these climate headlines was a far stranger and more ominous anomaly, a dramatic threefold increase in the bio-twang signal from the Mariana Trench. What had previously been an intermittent, low-frequency phenomenon became a relentless, intensifying presence. NOAA hydrophones detected not only a sharp rise in frequency and volume, but also an evolution in the tone itself, from melodic and rhythmic to distorted metallic reverberations, as if something was trying and struggling to communicate. Simultaneously, marine biologists began to report bizarre behavior in Bride's whales. Instead of their usual sporadic movements near the trench's periphery, the whales began clustering unnaturally close to the deep. Their pod sizes tripled, and their vocalizations shifted to mimic the structure of the biotwang, suggesting they were either responding to or being influenced by the signal. The calls were almost synchronized, something we've never observed at this scale, noted one researcher from the Pacific Marine Mammal Center. This strange acoustic convergence gave weight to earlier theories that something within the trench was engaging in two-way interaction, or manipulation. The year was also full of equipment failures of mysterious origin. 3 deep-sea monitoring buoys in the region lost communications within weeks of each other, according to reports. From diagnostics, there were no failures in the software, no loss of power, nothing but a complete blackout in data logging for a reason totally unknown. Then, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center saw 12 seismic alerts set off directly above the Mariana Trench at about the same time. No quakes followed. No one felt any tremors. Geologists were puzzled. These weren't tectonic events, but later on, vibration pulses under the trench with no regularity and rhythm, and in an unknown seismic pattern were traced. These fake alerts, along with the growing electronic disturbances, point to an active non-geological and non-random force, a first serious indication that the trench was no longer sleeping. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The biotwang faded in December 2016. The whale clusters dispersed, and the equipment failures finally stopped. But the silence was not reassuring. It was unsettling, a lull from a disturbance that felt more like retreat than resolution. A consensus has formed in hindsight among many researchers that 2016 represents more than just a spike in sound. It signifies for them the first real breach in presence. Something woke from deep time, something possibly conscious. Warnings encoded in sound, whale behavior, and seismic anomalies had mostly gone ignored by a world occupied with storm. The Trench Echo Initiative. In 2024, renewed global interest in deep-sea anomalies led the Oceanic Frontier Institute to launch an ambitious research campaign called the Trench Echo Initiative. Its goal was to use cutting-edge seismic mapping technology to create the most detailed subsurface model of the Mariana Trench ever attempted. Aboard the research vessel Mistral Horizon, scientists deployed next-generation ocean-bottom seismometers, sensitive enough to detect micro-movements hundreds of miles beneath the sea floor. Over 6 weeks, these instruments recorded something unprecedented, a low-frequency oscillation, repeating every 86 minutes, that pulsed from a depth of over 11,000 meters. It wasn't a tectonic tremor or volcanic activity. It was rhythmic, steady, and eerily deliberate, like a heartbeat. Unlike earthquakes or thermal vent activity, which generate chaotic or decaying energy signatures, this signal moved, displacing sediment and creating faint thermal disruptions along its path. The direction of movement was northwest, and its passage left behind micro-fractures in the seafloor. These fractures were shallow but widespread, suggesting a slow, massive entity or force was shifting below the Earth's crust, one that wasn't rising to the surface, but instead drifting horizontally. According to Mistral Horizon's lead geophysicist, Dr. Akari Watanabe, it wasn't seismic, it wasn't volcanic, it was something else entirely. And it was moving with purpose. The interaction of the signal and the already existing anomalies led to a further layer of complication. During the spectrogram analysis of the heartbeat-like pulse, they noticed a frequency interference, the faintly audible sound familiar to them from the early record of the biotwang some 10 years earlier. For the first time, sound was not linked to movement, it was synchronized with it. The biotwang and the heartbeat were seen to flare together as one might, with one leading on or tracking the other. An AI analyst describing the anomalies stated, "It was no longer just a sound, it was a signal with intent." The implications were staggering, and not just geology was possibly being looked at, it was a potential direct communication or an expression of function by something that was animated or mechanical deep beneath the trench. The shockwave sent through the scientific community was generated. AI simulations, or modeling of the environment, negated the possibility of known biological life forms, geothermal flows, and tectonic mechanisms. The potentiality was raised with the circulation of a biomechanical system, possibly newly active or, worse, an ancient dormant entity amongst the Earth's deepest scar. Attempts to trace and visualize the source were thwarted by sonar jamming and data corruption, intimidatingly suggestive of counter-scrambling or defensive systems. In his eerily brief report to the International Oceanic Science Council, Dr. Watanabe stated, "This signal does not behave like a natural phenomenon, it behaves like a response." The whale graveyard. By late 2024, coastlines across the Pacific began to witness an alarming and heartbreaking phenomenon: mass strandings of bride's whales, many of which had been tracked for years as part of deep-sea acoustic studies near the Mariana Trench. It began with isolated incidents, one carcass found in Palau, then a few more near Micronesia, but within weeks, the numbers escalated dramatically. 27 whales washed ashore in Papua New Guinea alone, most of them belonging to the same pod that had been observed circling the trench for over a decade. The sudden synchronized deaths of these deep-diving giants set off alarms across international marine biology networks. Post-mortem examinations revealed trauma so extreme and specific that natural causes could not explain it. The whales' vestibular systems, responsible for balance and navigation, were catastrophically damaged. Their inner ear structures, particularly the spiral ganglia, were burst and dislocated, while their sinus cavities showed massive swelling. Yet there was no external trauma, no ship strikes, no entanglement. Even more disturbing were signs that the whales had died mid-vocalization. They were calling when they died, one researcher said, referring to the strained tension in the vocal cords and surrounding tissue. It was as if they were trying to send a final message, or were caught in the act of sounding an alarm. What amazed scientists was the finding of a remarkable, unknown bioelectric substance in the tissues of whales. They called it resonant plasma. In the laboratory tests, this material emitted weak pulses in response to low-frequency vibrations and caused malfunctions in the electromagnetic instruments. This substance had never been observed in any known species in the sea. While it appeared neither like secreted organic materials, it did endow behavior similar to conductive metals in extremophiles at the deep-sea vent. It behaved like a signal carrier, not like a fluid, one molecular biologist said. It clearly indicated that whales had either absorbed or synthesized the material in reaction to a deep underwater acoustic anomaly, perhaps the biotwang or the seismic pulses recently detected during the Trench Echo initiative. As one area of research integrated into another, the most unsettling theory emerging from the work began to suggest that these whales had not simply died, but had also been resonance-stricken. Internal organs, that is, the inner ears and cranial cavities, were ruptured by an invisible low-frequency force, probably associated with the biotwang in synchrony with the trench heartbeat. It is that they were not passively dead. Rather, they underwent biological failures induced by an environmental frequency that was not suffered by their bodies. A number of scientists now think the whales were not mere victims. They took the role of messengers. Their last calls, frozen in death, were warnings. And whatever forces they were warning against was not only disturbing marine life, but beginning to erase it. RNA with a memory. In the wake of the 2024-2025 mass whale deaths and the escalating anomalies near the Mariana Trench, a multinational team of researchers turned their attention to the surrounding seawater. Using advanced environmental DNA, eDNA, extraction techniques, they filtered and sequenced biological material from the region where the biotwang signal had last been recorded. Initial findings returned as expected, fragments of plankton, cephalopods, and marine detritus. But buried within the noise, something highly unusual emerged, a repeating strand of RNA that defied classification, both in structure and behavior. This sequence was unlike anything seen in known marine biology. Portions of its molecular structure exhibited metallic bonding patterns, incorporating elements like manganese and cobalt, common in deep-sea environments, but unheard of in natural RNA. Even more bizarre, the RNA showed syntactic symmetry, a hallmark of intentional design rather than natural mutation. It wasn't just structured, said one molecular geneticist. It was organized, as if someone or something had built it. When stimulated with low-frequency sound in the lab, the RNA began exhibiting responsive behavior, subtly altering its configuration and even producing faint bioelectric activity. Researchers described it as RNA with a memory. To some authorities, changes in the architecture of the sequence related to matrices for quantum neural networks, postulated in experimental computation, indicate that this was not just organic material, but a biomechanical construction. The fusion of protein-like structures with those of the microlattice alloy fragments suggested that this is a hybrid form of life, a little biology, a little machine. Staggering implications arose. This material was not an excretion from any marine organism or from some industrial contaminant. It was engineered perhaps billions of years ago by some intelligence utterly unknown to human science. This is not evolutionary, concluded one AI-assisted geneticist. This is synthetic biology at a depth and age we cannot comprehend. So it gave a nefarious twist to this trench mystery. If indeed this was designed RNA, then one could surmise that its designer one or more would still exist or, at the very least, awoke recently. Coupled with the synchronized acoustic anomalies, seismic pulses, and cetacean deaths, the implication of this biomechanical RNA points towards something ancient and intelligent, now stirred into confrontation, resting at the bottom of the trench. The constraints of its existence certainly did not permit this exquisite RNA of life to have evolved into anything microbial or cetacean or machine-like. Other than that, it exists, something that was very likely once imprisoned by the depths of immense crushing pressure and is now beginning to rise. Just when researchers thought they'd found the deepest clue, the trench itself answered by vanishing. The collapse and the emergence. In early 2025, seismic monitors across the Pacific detected what first appeared to be a modest 5.9 magnitude undersea earthquake near Challenger Deep, the lowest known point on Earth. By tectonic standards, the quake was unremarkable, but what followed defied every known geological model. A 3-mile stretch of the trench floor collapsed, not as a crack or a typical subduction event, but as a void, an area described by scientists as an atmospheric cavity that should not have existed at those depths. It was as if the seafloor had been hollowed out, one geophysicist noted. The collapse sent a cascade of acoustic and seismic anomalies across the trench, and then silence. The biotwang, once a constant, went completely dark. That silence, however, lasted only 12 days. On the 13th, the sound returned, but it was no longer rhythmic or structured. It was chaos. Spectrograms exploded with overlapping acoustic threads, deep guttural growls, shrill screeches, and unidentifiable frequencies that had no consistent pitch or tempo. Marine AI systems trained to analyze natural underwater patterns crashed while processing the new data. One flagged the incoming signal as non-biological, non-random, and even matched portions of it to Cold War-era sonar jamming prototypes. This new acoustic fingerprint wasn't simply a noise, it was a hostile signal, intelligent enough to mask, confuse, and overwhelm detection systems. Whatever had emerged from the void was neither animal nor machine, but something else entirely. As these chaotic frequencies propagated, surface-level phenomena were ushered in. Fishing fleets in the Philippine Sea reported malfunctions to their equipment, GPS resets, sonar outages, and sudden electromagnetic interference. Satellite data showed thermal plumes rising up from the collapse site and heating the ocean primarily within a radius of 400 miles, going up to 2.6 degrees Celsius over just 3 months, an increase that was previously thought impossible without any visible signs of volcanic activity, which, incidentally, there were none. Coral reefs along the Mariana Plate began rapidly bleaching, for the first time showing bioluminescent fibers in their structure. Even more disturbing was the complete disappearance of Bride's whales from the region. No calls, no sonar pings, only an increasing, suffocating silence. It now appears that marine biologists interpret the biotwang, once thought to convey social meaning, as having been a warning. A chilling consensus has begun to take root among oceanographers and anomaly researchers. The Mariana Trench was never just a geological formation, it was a prison. Its depth, pressure, and isolation may have served as a natural containment system, one that could reasonably contain something for centuries, maybe even thousands of years. Now, evidence suggests that something might have been sealed there into failure. Past synchronous events, shifting acoustic trails, bioelectric RNA, and the mass deaths of whales were all precursors of emergence. Anything potentially awakened from slumber, uncontained somewhere below the deeps of Mariana. And while the surface went obliviously normal, the deep woke up, and something old is rising. Thanks for watching. If this deep-sea mystery gave you chills, give it a like, drop your thoughts or theories in the comments, and subscribe for more explorations into the unknown. And don't stop here. Check out the next video on your screen to dive even deeper. See you in the next one.